Beijing nightmare, the verdict on twisted love. Beijing on a desolate winter night. The leaden grey sky sank over the old apartment blocks like a torn blanket covering the entire city. The wind howled through cracks in the walls, lashing the twisted alleys of Chaoyang, where the pale yellow lights could not drive away the dampness clinging to each brick, each stagnant puddle reflecting distorted silhouettes. In a narrow alley, boarding house number 7 was unusually silent. On normal days, the place echoed with footsteps, the crackle of an old radio, or the quarrels from cramped, crowded rooms. But tonight, the silence was so heavy that even the wind seemed reluctant to pass through, leaving behind a suffocating void. Lin Hao, a young electrician, entered the hallway with his tool bag slung over one shoulder. The familiar musty odor of the housing block was suddenly overpowered by a sharp, foul stench, as if something were decaying inside the very walls. His brows furrowed, his heart beat faster. His professional instinct warned him something was wrong. Stopping at the door of room number 7, Lin Hao knocked a few times and waited. No sound answered. Only a dim light flickered through the crack, wavering as if about to die out. He knocked again, harder, but the silence remained dense, as if swallowing his knocks whole. He took a deep breath, his hand trembling slightly as it touched the doorknob. The rickety wooden door creaked open with a sound like grinding teeth, and at that moment, Lin Hao's whole body froze. The stench of death spilled out, hitting his nose, making him reel as if struck. Before him, on the cold grey tiles, lay the body of a woman face down, her hair covering her cheeks. Her skin was pale as candle wax, her lips dark purple. Dried dark streaks stained her clothes and the floor, glistening under the dim light, like an unfinished painting in shades of death. Beside her, a kitchen knife lay askew, its steel blade still smeared. Scratches on the wall, an overturned plastic chair, clear signs of struggle. The whole room seemed swept by a violent storm and then abandoned to eerie stillness. Lin Hao felt his hands go numb. He wanted to scream, but his throat tightened, releasing only ragged breaths. His whole body trembled, cold sweat running down his spine, though the winter air was already freezing. He instinctively stepped back, but his eyes were fixed on one small detail, the victim's hand. A thin, twisted hand, fingers bent as if clawing to grasp the edge of a tile. That posture was not surrender, but the final trace of a desperate fight to the very end. His phone slipped from his pocket, fell to the floor, and lit up its screen. The pale white glow shone on the stained ceiling and reflected in the victim's wide, unmoving eyes. Those eyes, though lifeless, still gleamed with frozen terror, as if trying to recount what had happened in that cramped room. For a moment, Lin Hao felt as if someone were staring at him through those ice-cold, pleading, and accusing all at once. He jolted, hurriedly grabbed his phone, his trembling hand dialing the police. His voice broke, fragmented, as if strangled by the darkness of the room. There's someone, dead. Room 7, Chaoyang, hurry. The phone slipped from his hand again. He collapsed in the hallway, his back against the wall, his eyes fixed on the still-open doorway. In his mind, the stench of death and those frozen eyes entwined into an obsession. One he knew would haunt him for a long time, even when the police arrived. Even when the red and blue lights tore through the silent night. And in the narrow alley of Chaoyang, the wind suddenly howled, carrying with it the chilling scent of death, seeping into every room, fanning a vague fear that tonight the city had lost not only a life, but had also revealed a darkness long growing behind its crumbling walls. Beijing at night never sleeps. The main roads still blazed with headlights, crowds rushing as if racing against time. But just turning into a small alley, everything changed instantly. Thick darkness, rusted power poles, stained walls, the sound of wind sneaking through half-closed windows. That contrast made the city feel like two overlapping worlds, one glamorous, one rotten, with crime usually choosing to dwell in the shadows. As soon as the crime report call came in, Chaoyong District Police immediately sealed off the scene. Sirens ripped through the night, red and blue lights sweeping across the old walls, making the cracked window panes shimmer like uneasy eyes. The tenants gathered, whispering anxiously, but none dared approach. In that scene, a figure stepped out of the police car. Inspector Zhang Bai. He was in his early 40s, tall, broad-shouldered, with strands of grey in his hair. His face bore deep lines around the eyes, the marks of many sleepless nights with homicide cases. His eyes were sharp as a scalpel's edge, yet always veiled by a weariness hard to name, as if too accustomed to witnessing the dark side of humanity. Zhang Bai was renowned in the force for his coldness and his ability to read a crime scene as if it were a hastily written diary. He rarely spoke much, but when he did, each word was sharp and concise like an order. Colleagues respected him, but also kept their distance, for to him, truth mattered more than anything, even feelings or honor. As he entered room 7, he paused for a long time at the threshold. Not out of fear, but because he had the habit of letting the space tell its story before stepping in. The stench of death, the dried blood, the disturbed furniture formed a distorted symphony whose melody only the familiar could discern. He bent down slightly, studying the marks on the tiles, several long streaks, evidence of a violent struggle. Knife slashes on the wall, overturned tables and chairs. And what caught his attention, the victim's frozen gaze, not only reflecting her final pain, but hiding within it a layer of unspoken fear. For a moment, Zhang Bai recalled an old memory, a case many years ago, when he was still young, also involving a girl victim in a cramped boarding room. Back then, he had failed to protect the witness, and the image of those terrified eyes had followed him throughout his career. He had never told anyone, but deep down, he always saw each case involving young women as a chance to repay that invisible debt. The wind whistled through the hallway, slamming against the half-closed door, making the room's light waver. Zhang Bai tightened the notebook in his hand, taking a deep breath. He knew well, this case would not stop at one knife wound and one suspect. Behind Tran Min's death, there might be a chain of darkness, longer and deeper. Lifting his gaze, his eyes turned cold, scanning every detail as if peeling back the layers of truth. Start collecting all evidence. His voice rang hoarse, firm, overwhelming even the whistling wind outside. Beijing's night was still noisy on the main roads, but inside room 7, silence had now turned into a kind of pressure. And the man named Zhang Bai, with harsh eyes, knew he had just stepped into a new labyrinth where each tiny trace could be a door or a bottomless abyss. In the pale white light of the forensic room, the sheet covering the body was pulled away. Tran Min Vinci, 6 years old, a final-year university student, working part-time at a small tea shop. A face once radiant in the eyes of her friends was now only the pallor of cold flesh. Bruises along her arms, scattered cuts, like painful inscriptions carved into her body, telling the story of a night of horror. Initial autopsy results: multiple direct stab wounds, head trauma from a heavy blow, clear signs of resistance. Estimated time of death, around 1 a.m. Room 7 was not just a crime scene. It was a cruel stage, where tragedy was built with blood and despair. Security cameras around the lodging, once reviewed, showed Tran Min returning to her room at 11:30 p.m. Nearly 2 hours later, at 1:15 a.m., a strange man left the room in a hurry, his steps unsteady, his head turning back with caution. The dim streetlight only drew a faint outline of his face, but that figure, that gait, seemed familiar to someone. The neighbors whispered, Lee Tong Tran Min's ex-boyfriend. They had seen him come here several times, sometimes arguing loudly, sometimes begging and pleading. Once, the sound of breaking objects echoed all the way to the end of the alley. Everyone knew the girl wanted to end the relationship, but he would not let go. Min's best friend La Hua was invited in to give a statement. She sat silent in the interrogation room, her hands twisted tightly together, her voice choked. In her final days, Min was very afraid. She told me Lee Tong often came to the tea shop, making a scene, forcing her to come back. Min said to me, I want to escape, but he won't ever let me be. The police traced the victim's phone. In her final messages, Min wrote, If I disappear, remember, it's him. That message was like a last testament, both evidence and a cry of helpless despair. Lee Tong's phone was confiscated. Inside were countless threatening messages, relentless late-night calls. There was even a recording of him growling angrily, If you dare leave me, then don't blame me. His fingerprints appeared on the kitchen knife, the weapon, beside the body. Bloodstains on his shirt matched the victim's DNA. Each piece seemed to point in one direction. He was the one who took Tran Min's life. Inspector Zhong Bai sat in the interrogation room, his eyes drilling straight through the confident shell of the man across from him. Lee Tong was about 30, his face stiff, his gaze cold. At first, he denied any involvement, claiming he only came to talk that night and then left. But as each piece of evidence was presented, the camera, the messages, the knife, that shell began to crack. I didn't kill her. His voice was harsh, but his hand trembled slightly, tapping erratically on the steel table. Then who? Zhang Bai asked again, his tone calm but heavy as stone. Who left the room at 1 a.m., if not you? A long silence followed. Lee Tong lowered his head slightly, sweat beating at his temple. In the thick air, his breath grew heavier, words spilling out like a confession. I just wanted her to listen to me. She said she would leave, never come back. I lost control. Zhong Bai's pen tapped a steady rhythm, his eyes never leaving the face across from him. In those tangled words, he heard something familiar. Love warped into obsession, possession disguised as protection. And sometimes, that was the shortest path to crime. But inside, Zhang Bai was in no hurry to conclude. There was evidence, there was testimony. Yet everything came too easily, too neatly. He knew well, cases that seemed clear from the start often hid another layer of darkness, deeper still. Pale light spilled across the interrogation room ceiling. Lee Tong sat there, back hunched, breath heavy. The earlier admissions about his anger, about the stabs, made the whole investigation team almost certain the case was closed. The files were being prepared for closure, a death sentence almost a given. But Inspector Zhong Bai could not shake the chill running down his spine. Too smooth, too tidy. A man collapsing so easily before a few pieces of evidence. He had faced far more ruthless men, and they clung to denial until the very end. Something didn't add up. While the young officers gathered the files, Zhang Bai replayed the camera footage. The blurry footage showed the man stepping out of room 7, glancing back before vanishing into the dark. He zoomed in, pausing on each frame. The gait was uneven, the left step clearly off as if from an old knee injury. Jiang Bai reviewed Li Tong's medical records. No such injury had ever been recorded. He was a gym-goer with a balanced body and a steady gait. Then who was the man in the camera? That question echoed like metallic hammering in his mind. He signaled to his assistant, "Compare the shoe prints at the scene." Result: the shoe prints on the tiles of room 7 were larger than Li Tong's shoe size. Not only that, the sole pattern was completely different from the shoes he usually wore. If his confession was true, why was there such a glaring discrepancy? Jiang Bai returned to the interrogation room, staring directly at Li Tong. "You said you killed her," his voice steady, without anger. "But why don't the footprints match?" Li Tong froze, his eyes flashing with confusion. He stammered, I don't know." "You don't even limp," Jiang Bai pressed. "The man in the footage does. Why confess? Who is telling you to take the blame?" The room sank into thick silence. Only the faint crackle of the recording device could be heard. Li Tong lowered his head, his hands clenching until veins bulged. Then he muttered in a trembling breath, "I just didn't want to drag anyone else in." Jiang Bai raised an eyebrow. Behind that confession was something like desperate protection, but not for himself. At that moment, the supplementary forensic report arrived. Under Tran Min's fingernails were traces of another person's DNA, not matching Li Tong's. Beneath her nails were deep scratches, proving she had fought fiercely against a stranger. The pieces of the puzzle began to shift. If not Li Tong, then why were his fingerprints on the knife? Why did the blood on his shirt match the victim's? Jiang Bai returned to the scene once more. He stood in room 7, where the streetlight shone through the stained window crack. He examined carefully the position of the knife. It was laid neatly beside the body, not fallen chaotically like a weapon of rage. Everything looked as if arranged. Suddenly, he recalled the words of Min's best friend, Lahua. She said if she disappeared, remember, it was him. But if Min had known the danger, why let him into the room? Or had she opened the door for someone else, someone she never suspected would end her life? Lost in tangled thoughts, Jiang Bai received a call. On the other end was the digital forensics team. They had just recovered an audio file from the victim's phone, deleted right before the crime. Tran Min's trembling, choked voice. "If anything happens, please seek the truth. Not only Li Tong, there is someone else watching me." Jiang Bai's heart skipped a beat. This was the crack opening into a greater darkness. The case was not simply blind jealousy. There was another hand, unseen yet meticulous, that had staged this entire bloody play. He stood silently in the room, where the cold slipped through every crack, carrying the scent of dampness and death. A heavy question echoed in his mind. If Li Tong is not the only one, then who else is hiding in the darkness of Beijing? The night wind swept through the police courtyard, carrying a bone-chilling cold. Jiang Bai stood before the investigation board, dozens of photos, diagrams, and the red words like spreading bloodstains, not just one killer. He closed his eyes, letting his thoughts piece together the fragments. The knife with 2 obvious fingerprints, the camera with the limping figure, the half-hearted confession, and Tran Min's choked voice in the recording. There is someone else. Just as the case file was about to close, a new witness appeared. A middle-aged woman, thin, with dark circles under her eyes, as if she had never slept well. The owner of the tea shop where Min worked. She spoke with trembling voice. Before she died, Min often mentioned a strange customer. He sat in the shop for hours, saying little, just staring. Every time he left, Min turned pale. Pressed by Jiang Bai, she searched her memory and softly said, He limped, left leg. The words were like a cold blade piercing the puzzle he was assembling. The figure in the camera, it was him. Then why did all the evidence tie so tightly to Li Tong? The digital forensics team continued extracting data from Min's computer. In a hidden folder, they found a series of unsent emails. The contents were fragmented but haunting. Someone watches me every night. He stands at the end of the alley, under the yellow light, saying nothing. I don't know who he is, but I feel he knows everything. I want to go to the police, but I'm afraid no one will believe me. Another email, the last line left unfinished. If I disappear, please find the one who limps. In Zhongbai's heart, blocks of doubt began to melt, revealing a chilling truth. Li Tong might be violent and jealous, but he was not the only one who cast Min into a nightmare. The supplementary forensic results darkened the picture further. On Min's body, besides stab wounds, there were marks of rope binding her wrists. A coarse rope, something not found anywhere in room 7. That proved, before being killed, Min may have been tied and restrained. But who did it, and where? Zhang Bai ordered the investigation expanded around the lodging. In an abandoned house at the end of the alley, the forensics team found a blood-stained rope and a limping footprint on the damp ground. The mysterious figure had truly been there, not just an illusion. Meanwhile, Li Tong suddenly requested to meet the investigator again. He slumped into the chair, dark circles under his eyes, hands trembling. I don't want to hide it anymore. That night, when I arrived, Min was no longer alone. There was a strange man in the room. I went mad. I grabbed a knife. I only remember blood splattering on my shirt. Then everything turned chaotic. I ran away. He buried his face in his hands, his voice breaking. I loved her, but I wasn't the only one. Someone was waiting for me to make a mistake. That confession was like a hammer blow cracking open the concrete around the case. If true, then the hidden culprit had staged the entire play, using Li Tong's jealousy as a tool to cover the real crime. Zhang Bai stepped into the hallway, where the Beijing wind howled through the narrow window. In the dim light, he saw more clearly than ever. Truth was not a single shining mirror, but thousands of fragments, reflecting tangled human shadows. And there was one shadow, limping, still unseen. The Beijing sky was covered with grey clouds, streetlights spilling down like oil stains on the cold, wet asphalt. Inspector Zhang Bai walked slowly through the alley leading to the lodging. Though he had solved cases for many years, he felt a strange pressure in this one, as if the darkness covered not only the crime scene, but also everyone connected to it. That night, the surveillance team reported an unusual finding. A camera at the bus station 2 blocks away recorded a limping man, carrying a large black plastic bag on his shoulder, appearing exactly at the time Tran Min died. He walked calmly as if nothing was wrong, then vanished into the flow of night traffic. A closer view of his face, though blurred, was still recognizable. Deng Chao, a neighbor living in the same block, who had visited room 7 many times. That name rang in Zhang Bai's head like pounding bells. Resident records showed Deng Chao was in his 30s, unemployed, with a prior conviction for violent assault. He lived alone, his room windows always shut, and most striking of all, his left leg had been crippled from an accident years ago. Police immediately raided Deng Chao's room. The air was thick with dampness and stale smoke. On the wooden table lay a torn notebook filled with scrawled lines. She must belong to me. Don't let him, Li Tong, touch her again. If she leaves, I will keep her in my own way. The words were like knife slashes of madness. In the cabinet, Police also found a woman's scarf stained with dried blood, matching Tran Min's DNA. The news stunned the whole team. It turned out, Tran Min had not only been haunted by her ex-boyfriend's jealousy, but also trapped by a sick neighbor, silently watching her every move. When arrested, Deng Chao still kept a chillingly calm expression. He sat in the interrogation room, eyes narrowed, the corner of his mouth curling into a misplaced smile. "You think I killed her?" "No, I only freed her from people like Li Tong." Zhang Bai stared, forcing himself to stay calm. "Freedom with a knife, with ropes." Deng Chao let out a dry laugh, the harsh sound echoing through the room. "She was afraid of him. I saw everything. I heard her crying behind the wall every night. I was the only one who could save her. But she refused to understand." He leaned back in the chair, his eyes drifting like in a trance. "That night, I entered the room while he was still there. I saw them arguing. I grabbed the knife. I saw blood. He ran. I stayed. I held her. But she grew colder. I only wanted her not to hurt anymore." That testimony turned the picture completely upside down. It was not one killer. Tran Min's death was the result of two shadows crossing, an ex-lover blinded by jealousy, and a deranged neighbor who believed himself the savior. But what chilled Zhang Bai was not only that truth. It was the final detail. Deng Chao whispered, eyes shut as if in prayer. "She is still here. Every night, I hear footsteps in the hallway. She hasn't left me." The air in the room thickened, as if someone had just blown out an invisible candle. The investigators looked at each other, none speaking another word. The supplementary forensic report confirmed. The marks on the victim's wrists matched the rope found in the abandoned house where Deng Chao had often gone. DNA under Tran Min's fingernails matched him, not Li Tong. Tran Min's death was no longer a simple crime of jealousy. It was a layered tragedy, where a young woman was trapped between two crushing jaw-sick love and deranged obsession. Zhang Bai sat alone before the investigation board, marked with red lines. In his mind, a freezing question drilled deeper. Justice can force a man to confess, but how can it bind the darkness in the minds of the living? Beijing winter, thin snow blanketed the steps of the People's Court. Hundreds of citizens, reporters, and families silently carrying portraits gathered outside. The air was heavy, as if the whole city held its breath, awaiting a verdict not only for a man, but for a darkness that had lingered for years. In the courtroom, white light from the high ceiling poured down, illuminating the two defendants. Li Tong with a gaunt face and empty eyes, like a man who had ended himself long ago. Beside him was Deng Chao's sunken eyes, a twisted smile, a gaze both proud and deranged. The prosecutor presented undeniable evidence: the bloodied knife, rope marks, DNA under the victim's nails, the camera showing him leaving. Witness statements, unsent emails, all pieced together into a horrific picture. When the final lines of Tran Min's diary were read, "If I disappear, find the one who limps," the entire courtroom fell silent. No tapping pens, no coughs, only the heavy breathing of those witnessing. Min's parents sat in the front row, eyes sunken, hands clasped so tightly they bled. Her friends, young faces, cried while holding each other's hands. They knew today's verdict could not bring Min back, but at least it might prevent other girls from falling into the same spiral. After hours of deliberation, the judge's deep voice resounded through the chamber. Li Tong, guilty of murder out of jealousy, brutal conduct causing particularly serious consequences. The court sentences: death penalty. Gelte, guilty of premeditated murder, with many aggravating circumstances, especially the perverse obsession leading to violence. The court sentences, death penalty, 2 sentences were pronounced, but the echo was not of satisfaction. It was a cold silence, like wind through old stone walls. Justice was carried out, but the pain remained etched, impossible to erase. Zhongbai stood alone outside, watching the crowd fade into the drifting snow. He felt it clearly. Every step leaving the court today carried a question how to prevent this from happening again. In his final report to his superiors, he wrote, "We can imprison a culprit, even sentence a murderer to death, but justice does not lie only in the hammer of the court. Justice begins with warnings not ignored, with cries for help that are heard, with doors opened before it is too late." Tran Min died from a knife, but she also died from silence. Our silence as neighbors, friends, as a society. Outside, the Beijing sky still sagged with grey clouds. The pale streetlights flickered over alleys where passers-by dared not meet each other's eyes for long. But in the wind, Zhongbai still heard Min's voice echo, "Never stay silent, because silence is also a crime." He raised his head, taking a long breath. In his aging eyes, there was still light, not the dazzling light of victory, but a steady flame, faint, yet never extinguished.